Now, what about the theoretical toolkit? I just want to say for a few moments some of the ways in which we think about place. As geographers, place is the single most important construct we use. Ngunguru and Ocean Beach, significant places, not just for people who live there, but people who go there. Place is not just a location. What real estate agents say to you that a certain property is location, 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 don't believe them. It's more than location. The place is all about a felt experience of dwelling there and experiencing what goes on there. And this is really what we were trying to do in this work. We wanted to explore some of the notions of place, such as topophilia. This is a notion that's been proposed, or was proposed about 30 years ago now by a very famous cultural geographer by the name of Pt2. He coined the term topophilia, topo being the land or the maps, philia, love of. So love of place, topo place, philia, love of. And what is the flip side of that? Douglas Porteous coined the term topocide. You've got suicide or genocide. Topocide is the destruction of place. And so, as well as some of the basic tools of trying to understand place, such as property, the fundamental sort of legal ways in which land is divided up and tenure and access, as well as exploring sense of place, how people experience place, we wanted to explore these emotions around people's connectedness with place. Okay, so just briefly, just to give you a flavour of this at the sort of the other end of the research project around the attempts to try and discern and plumb the feelings attached to the place. And remember, the reason is not just for the sake of it. We were trying to understand what was driving communities to resist. Because if communities were interested in economic development, then presumably they'd be saying gung-ho, great, okay, let's have more people living here. But there was resistance. Why resistance? I want to just give you a couple of examples. Here's one discourse that we came up with, and we called this the childhood idyll, like the rural idyll, the way in which there's a construction of a place as fundamental to a part of the life course, in this case childhood. So what we discerned in both locations was that the undeveloped coast within New Zealand is a site for experiencing the ideal childhood and the benefits of New Zealand life to children. Place attachments forming at a very young age. And we discerned that really is related to some of the shock horror around campground closures and batches no longer being affordable, etc. So here's a quote from someone at Ngunguru. The childhood that we've had, the experience of being out in the open, being able to go and experience places, especially along the coast, I think that's an integral part of life for a lot of Kiwis. Then a second discourse around the love of place. Numerous comments seem to evoke this sense of topophilia. Here's someone, again, let's mix it up. I'll turn to a discourse from someone in Ocean Beach. They said, "This is a place I love very much now, having been going out there." This is someone in suburban Napier, I think it was. "Having been going out there for 50 years. My children love it too. They're probably far more conscious of their appreciation of it than I ever was. This sort of experience that I have there at Ocean Beach was far more common 30 or 40 years ago than they get now in a more urbanized society." So the idea of a sort of a closing set of opportunities. And then a last set of comments around what we would call the personal relational attachment between people and place on the coast. Here's a person again at Ocean Beach, a Māori woman who says, "Our families have moved up and down here, up and down the valley. They would have ducked out over the hill and down there and gone to the beach and got their pippies and mussels. They would have moved there. We got rocks that would have been useful for weights in their boats. The history here is living. It's not something you take out of isolation." And this seems to me to resonate deeply with the comments of a Māori geographer, Ailsa Smith, who says, in relation to the coast, "The footsteps of your ancestors consolidated the dirt of the track you walk on and negotiated the same rocky incline to the beach." In other words, history is not something that's simply oral or written. History is imprinted upon the land itself. So those are a few brief examples of the way we can draw deeply felt discourse out of wide-ranging interviews with people. I just want to close this part of the conversation just with a couple of comments. Firstly, around why should we take feelings seriously? Well, I think first off, we are founded as a Western society to value rationality over feelings. We could identify a whole set of binary constructs going back to the Greeks and the Romans around putting rationality in the head before the heart. And it's all constructed, all connected to constructions of rationality and masculinity and urbanization and economics and all of these ways in which the feelings and perhaps the wildness, the reluctance to allow ourselves to be moved by feelings, that word movement has been marginalized. So clearly feelings are connected to a sense of belonging, and emotional connections transcend diverse cultural backgrounds. We found both Māori and Pākehā using terms like tūranga waiwai. You know, a 60-year-old Pākehā man in Napier saying that beach is my tūranga waiwai. I mean, we see a certain sort of slippage of language that identifies an adoptive homeland. I think also there is a strong sense of the beach and the coast as being a place of retreat. We live in a largely secular society, and yet there is a strong tradition of people going on retreat. What does that mean for us in contemporary New Zealand society? By retreat, we could talk about sites which offer a person some distance from his or her everyday commitments and responsibilities, such that it becomes possible to think and feel differently. That's a quote from one of my colleagues, David Conradson, a geographer at the University of Canterbury. And I think that this sense of the coast providing a sense of retreat, whether it be in a secular or a spiritual sense, is very important. And yet, in drawing these comments to a close, it does raise a very critical question that I can't answer. I come along here with more questions than answers in many ways. I come with answers from the fieldwork I've done, but questions at a more philosophical level. For instance, it seems to me that we're having a very hard time in New Zealand society, sort of 30 years on from the so-called New Zealand experiment almost, in which there was a greater emphasis on the individual, competition, away from the collective. We're having a hard time in New Zealand society reconnecting rights with responsibilities. To some extent that has happened through some of the great foresight of some of our political leaders in Auckland through the establishment of a network of regional parks. But it hasn't happened elsewhere in the country, and notably the two case study sites, one is in Northern, one is Hawkes Bay. The great promise of the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement didn't get followed through because of the sense of regions and parts of New Zealand wanting to do their own thing, so to speak. But it is an extremely difficult challenge to balance rights when there's this issue of the sort of the moral good of society. And this is a particular question that my colleague Damien Collins is interested in as someone who's immersed himself in the emergent field of legal geography. But it does seem to me that the coast, going back to a fundamental point, when we think about why did most Māori settlements occur on the coast in pre-European times, it's because fundamental human needs were addressed. The need of food, the need of shelter in bays away from the harsh coast, the rich bush that was near the coast. If we take a psychological construct like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is conceptualized in a pyramid, that base level is the physiological need that is addressed. Now, urbanized society such as we are, we don't actually need the coast to address those physiological needs. In fact, one of the greatest lobbies around the coast and the foreshore and whatever is around the fishing lobby. But that's not because people need to fish to feed themselves. It's the recreational fishing lobby. So in terms of Maslow's hierarchy, we really need to go up the hierarchy to begin to understand why there is such resistance by communities. And further up the hierarchy, we see needs that are listed, such as the need for identity to be fulfilled, self-actualization. Abraham Maslow talks about as one of the needs that is highest up the pyramid. And I think that speaks to that need that David Conradson talks about, that need for retreat and that need for a space to be, and why those two communities are seeking out retention of a sense of wilderness. I'll stop there.